1. I love Habakkuk. Probably my favorite minor prophet. Just the honesty that's here. You know what's great about the book of Habakkuk is God's not writing a letter through Habakkuk to Judah. It's literally a conversation. It's almost like a journal entry between a conversation between Habakkuk and God. And Habakkuk asks some questions that I think we ask sometimes. And so it's just a good book. Thankful that it's in the Bible for us to just kind of see this conversation between this prophet Habakkuk, who we really don't know a whole lot about. We really don't know much about him. And a conversation that he has with God. So the first 2 chapters deal with a couple of things. Habakkuk asks 2 questions. God responds to both of those questions. And then he gives 5 woes. And then chapter 3, which I read on Sunday morning, is Habakkuk writing his response to all of this. And then we'll end on the last few verses, which are just phenomenal verses. So here we go. Habakkuk, chapter 1. The pronouncement that the prophet Habakkuk saw. This is probably written during Judah's history there, early 600 BC. Habakkuk's writing this. Here's what he says. How long, Lord, must I call for help, and you do not listen? Or cry out to you about violence, and you do not save? Why do you force me to look at injustice? Why do you tolerate wrongdoing? Oppression and violence are right in front of me. Strife is ongoing. Conflict escalates. This is why the law is ineffective and justice never emerges. For the wicked restrict the righteous. Therefore justice comes out perverted. So Habakkuk's writing and he's like, God, how long am I going to have to pray before you do something? Now, we don't know how long Habakkuk had been praying. He doesn't say, hey, for the last 9 weeks, 9 months, 9 years, I've been praying. We don't know that. All we know is that Habakkuk cries out and says, God, when are you going to listen to my prayer? You ever been there? You pray something, you've cried out, you've been in the altar, you've been beside the bed, you've been knelt down in the living room, and you have cried and wept and cried and wept, and it's as if God has just gone deaf. That's what Habakkuk's doing. God, how long? God, he says here, he says, I look outside, and I see oppression, I see injustice, I see wrongdoing, I see violence. You're not even listening to me. So just kind of put this together. Habakkuk's like, God, I'm praying for an end to the violence, an end to the oppression. I'm praying for an end to all of this aggression and all of this wrongdoing. I'm praying for an end to this, and you're not listening to me. So really, Habakkuk kind of has 2 problems, does he not? The first problem is that, God, why are you not paying attention to me? Why are you not listening to me? The second problem is that he's still having to watch all of this injustice and wrongdoing. He's still having to continue to be in front of him all of this grotesque things that's happening here. And all of this stuff that's... And so you can just kind of gather in your senses just a moment the weight of which Habakkuk's having to deal with all of this. I'm seeing this, you're not listening to me. I'm still seeing this, you're not listening to me. You're not paying attention. God responds, verse 5. Look at the nations and observe. Be utterly astounded. Listen to this. For I am doing something in your days that you will not believe when you hear about it. Now, I've been in settings where a guy will stand up and he'll read that, and it'll be something on a positive note. Man, God's doing some incredible things. You wouldn't see it. You wouldn't believe it. Man, God's doing all this. And I just kind of want to, I do just think in my heart that a passage of Scripture can never mean what a passage of Scripture never meant. And God did not mean for this verse to be some happy, good, fuzzy, I'm about to do something. You're not going to believe what I'm about to do. This is awesome. This is so good. That's not what God is saying here. You can say, how do you know that? Well, what's the very next verse here? Look, I'm raising up the who? The Chaldeans. I'm raising up the Babylonians. Well, I mean, it's like somebody unplugs the jukebox. Do what? You're going to do what? God's like, Habakkuk, I hear you. But I'm gonna answer your request in a way that if you would not believe it. I'm about to use the Babylonians. I think about that for us today. We cry out to God, God, would you send revival? God, would you send this? God, would you do this? Would you restore our land? God, would you take away the oppression and the violence and the anger and the hostility? God, would you remove all of this across our land? And what God's response is, I'm going to do something that if I told you weren't going to believe it. Here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to use ISIS. But I think we all just kind of be like, do what? God's like, I'm going to use the Babylonians, the Chaldeans. What's he say? That bitter, impetuous nation that marches across the earth's open spaces to seize territories not its own. Then he describes them. They're fierce and they're terrifying. Their views of justice and sovereignty stem from themselves. Very powerful. Their horses are swifter than leopards and more fierce than wolves of the night. Their horsemen charge ahead. Their horsemen come from distant lands. They fly like eagles, swooping to devour. All of them come to do violence. Their faces are set in determination. They gather prisoners like sand. They mock kings, and rulers are a joke to them. They laugh at every fortress and build siege ramps to capture it. Then they sweep up like the wind and pass through. They are guilty. Their strength is their God. Now, that is not a description of a good, wholesome, godly group of people. He's not describing Andy Griffith and his buddies. He is describing a horrible group of people who are bent on destruction, desolation. They are after people in manners and ways that you and I cannot even fathom. And God's like, Habakkuk, I'm going to answer your request. I'm listening, but here's how I'm going to do it. If I told you exactly how to do it, you wouldn't believe it. I'm going to use the Chaldeans, and then he describes the Chaldeans. Now, assuming you don't know the rest of the book, at this moment, how would you feel if you were Habakkuk? What are some things and thoughts that would come to your mind? Discouragement, okay. Do what? Frustration, okay. Abandonment. Why? That's so good. Why? Like, and here's the thing about Habakkuk that sometimes I write my journal and read this. God literally could have used anything and anybody in the entire world. He could have done anything, but he chose to use the Chaldeans in the midst of this. So you're like, why? You might have asked God, why? I have. Why? So then Habakkuk answers with another question. He says, are you not from eternity, Lord my God, my Holy One? You will not die. Lord, you appointed them
to execute judgment. My rock, you destined them to punish us. You can hear the why in there. Your eyes are too pure to look on evil, and you cannot tolerate wrongdoing. So why do you tolerate those who are treacherous? God, this goes against, wait a minute. You're an eternal God. You can't even look at what are you doing? You can't even look upon what they're doing. What are you doing here? You just see this why, this frustration, this weight. What you're going to do? You're going to do what? And you kind of see this buildup. And I think this is incredibly important. I just want you to get this. That Habakkuk's God, this makes no sense. This absolutely makes no sense what you're doing. You know what would be a good sermon series one time? To do a sermon series on stories in the Bible when God just doesn't make sense. This makes no sense. You think about Gideon. You shared about Gideon and Barnabas. Gideon's you want me to do what? You want me to get rid of these people? How many you want me to get rid of? You want me to keep getting rid of them? This makes absolutely no sense. But Habakkuk's response, God, you can't even tolerate it. Here, here's what he says. Why are you still silent? While one who is a wicked swallows up one who is more righteous than himself, you have made mankind like the fish of the sea, like marine creatures that have no ruler. The Chaldeans pull them up with a hook, catch them in their dragnet, and gather them in their fishing net. That is why they are glad and rejoice. That is why they sacrifice to their dragnet and burn incense to their fishing net. For by these things their portion is rich and their food plentiful. Will they therefore empty their nets and continually slaughter nations without mercy? God, this is insane. So, I think, I just want you to get this, because I think what you're about to see helps in what's happening. Habakkuk's this makes no sense. I cannot believe you're doing this. Why are you doing this? These people are this way. They treat nations this way. They do this. There's all this confusion. There's all this, you can see this questioning and doubting and wondering. And then what is Habakkuk's response? Then what does Habakkuk say I'm going to do? Now stop. For a lot of us, and I've been there, you doubt God, you wonder about God, you question God. God, this doesn't make sense. I don't understand why you're doing this. God, I'm not going to do this. And here's what oftentimes, if we're not careful, here's what will happen. We'll become angry at God and we'll distance ourselves from God. Or we'll become frustrated with God and we'll quit doing the thing in which God's called us to do. And I've seen this happen in people's lives. You've seen this happen in people's lives. Something happens, and God doesn't answer requests the way that they wanted him to answer. He doesn't do exactly what they wanted him to do. He doesn't level things exactly how they thought he should. And so they get mad. They quit coming to church. They quit coming to Sunday school. They quit coming to this. They quit being a part of this. They quit going here. They quit doing that. And they pull away from God because God doesn't answer their requests exactly how they wanted him to answer it. And I can tell you know people who have literally just pulled away in anger and frustration at God for his not responding or answering in the way that they thought made sense. And they quit. But notice what Habakkuk does. This is so good. Notice what Habakkuk does. Verse 1. I will stand at my guard post and station myself on the lookout tower. I will watch to see what he will say to me and what I should reply about my complaints. You know what Habakkuk says? Come in here real close. Keith made fun of me about that. I heard. You know what he says? Habakkuk says, God, this makes no sense. And I don't understand it. And I'm confused by it. But I'm going to go back to my post. I'm going to go back to my spot, and I'm going to go back to doing what you called me and what I'm supposed to be doing. You can't miss verse 1, following chapter. Verse 1 of chapter 2, following chapter 1. Habakkuk doesn't get angry. Habakkuk doesn't look at God and say, this is what you're going to do? Forget it. Find somebody else. Habakkuk doesn't swell up in frustration. He doesn't swell up in all of it. He doesn't have any of this. Here's what he says. I'm going to go stand on my post. And you know what he says? I'm going to wait to hear what the Lord has to say. And then how I should respond to what he said. I'm just going to go over here and wait. And I'll wonder,
I wonder what would happen in families, in marriages, in churches, in communities, in nations, in countries, if people, instead of becoming angry and ticked off because God doesn't respond to a prayer request in a way in which they were going to do, which they want, and flee from Him. What would happen if people just stood up and said, "You're the sovereign God of the world. And if that's what you want to do, I'm going to go back to my post, and I'm just going to be faithful in what you've called me to do and continue to serve in the manner in which you have called me to serve." That's exactly what Habakkuk says. I'm going to stand on my post, and I'm going to wait. So then God responds. Verse 2. The Lord answered me. "Write down this vision, clearly inscribe it on tablets, so one may easily read it. For the vision is yet for the appointed time. It testifies about the end and will not lie. Though it delays, wait for it, since it will certainly come and not be late. Look, his ego is inflated. He is without integrity." Underline this. "But the righteous will live by his faith. Moreover, wine betrays, an arrogant man is never at rest. He enlarges his appetite like Sheol, and like death he's never satisfied. He gathers all the nations to himself. He collects all the peoples to himself. But the righteous will live by his faith." And so I wrote in my margins here, I've written this in other Bibles in which I have. Here's what Habakkuk teaches me, and this is a hard lesson, and I will say that I'm having to learn this, and I think I will be learning it till the day I die. What Habakkuk teaches me, David, there will be times when you will cry out to God for God to do something. And God may delay, God may not answer immediately, or God may not answer it the way in which you have conceived in your mind is the way it should be answered. My responsibility is not to become angry and frustrated and upset and ticked off at God. My responsibility is to go to my post and live by faith that the Lord knows what He's doing. And there have been times in my life where I have tried to figure out an answer to a problem in which I'm praying for, and I've got myself in a little bit more trouble than I've ever been there. But Habakkuk, every year when you read this, is just this gentle reminder. It may not make sense to you, but God is sovereign. And you may not understand it, but God knows what He's doing. And you may think that it should be done a different way. You live by faith. Trust the Lord, go to your post, and do the things in which God has called you to do. So then you get these woes. All right. 5 woes. The first, to the extortioner. Won't all these take up a taunt against him with mockery and riddles about him? They will say, "Woe to him who amasses what is not his. How much longer? The loads himself with goods takes in pledge. Won't your creditors suddenly arise, and those who disturb you awaken them? Then you will become spoil for them, since you have plundered many nations. All the nations who remain will plunder you because of human bloodshed and violence against land, cities, and all who live in them." Number 2, woe to the greedy and the arrogant. Woe to him who dishonestly makes wealth for his house, to place his nest on high, to escape the grasp of disaster. You plan shame to your house by wiping out many peoples and sinning against your own self, and the stones will cry from the wall, and rafters will answer them. The 12 through 14 is woe to the one who sheds blood. Verses 14 through 17 is woe to the drunk and the violent. Verses 18 and 19 is a woe to the maker of an idol. He says in verse 20, "But the Lord is in His temple, let the whole earth be silent by His or in His presence." And then you get to chapter 3. So, I'll hurry. But not many more to be, so I'm going to have to do this. Chapter 3 is one of the best chapters in all the minor prophets. So Habakkuk cries out to the Lord. Here's what he says in verse 1. A prayer to the prophet of the prophet Habakkuk. This is a prayer. Lord, I've heard the report about you. Lord, I stand in awe of your deeds. Revive your work in these years. Make it known in these years. In your wrath, remember mercy. God, I know your testimony. This is confession and a petition to the Lord. Then there's a description of the Lord in verse 3 down to verse 15. I read this on Sunday morning. You can go back and read it. It's the end of the chapter 3, where Habakkuk says these words. Verse 16, I heard and I trembled within. My lips quivered at the sound. Rottenness entered my bones. I trembled where I stood. Now I must quietly wait for the day of distress to come against the people invading us. I'm waiting for the Galileans. Here's what happens. Verse 17. Though the fig tree does not bud, the fig was a delicacy that people ate. Though there's no fruit on the vines, that's what they drank for the day. Though there's no olive crop, it fails. Olives were used for cooking and medicine. And though the fields produce no food, it's the food supply. And there's no herds, the flocks disappear from the pen, and there's no herds in the stall. Very quickly, underline every single one of those. Here's what's important. Every single one of those things are a blessing from the Lord. If we had time, if I was preaching a sermon series, we could camp out here. You can go back and you can read Old Testament passage scriptures where every single one of these things are listed in Old Testament passages as a blessing from the Lord. The nation of Israel realized that the fruit on the vine was a blessing from the Lord. The cows in the pen were a blessing from the Lord. The fig trees were a blessing from the Lord. The olives were a blessing from the Lord. Every single one of these was a blessing from the Lord. So listen to what he says. Habakkuk says, though you are removing the blessings in my life. Now think about this. Though you are removing the blessings in my life, though these things don't, you bless these are from you, but even though these things don't exist, and here's another thing to think about. These things are being removed because of the sins of the nation of Israel. So then you have to wrestle with this. How do you respond when the blessings of God are removed or withheld from your life?